The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the stars look like they were whispering secrets to one another. Far above the world, satellites traced their endless paths across the sky, their instruments capturing signals, measuring temperatures, and sending data back to Earth. For years, the scientists watching the heavens had dreamed of something unusual appearing in those signals. They expected maybe a strange radio burst, or perhaps a pulse from a distant star. But on one particular evening, something arrived that none of them could have prepared for. At first, it looked ordinary, just a faint repeating sound hidden in the static of space. Many thought it was interference, a glitch caused by solar flares or a malfunctioning antenna. But as the data was cleaned, the signal began to reveal structure. It wasn't random noise. It was deliberate. It had patterns, rhythms, and what almost seemed like a mathematical language built inside it. That realization sent shivers through the scientists who first saw it. This was no star. This was no machine failure. This was a message. The news spread quietly at first. A few researchers compared notes, sending emails filled with cautious excitement. Governments were alerted, and in private rooms, leaders leaned over glowing screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. For the first time in human history, the possibility that someone, something out there, was trying to speak to. Earth was no longer science fiction. It was real. But humanity, being humanity, did not meet the moment with silence or panic. Instead, the discovery became the spark of endless debates, arguments, and excitement. Some saw it as hope, proof that Earth was not alone, that the universe carried neighbors waiting to be met. Others warned of danger, asking why an unknown species would reach out across the stars. Was it a greeting, or was it bait? Meanwhile, the signal kept coming, repeating in steady cycles. It wasn't a voice, but it carried intent. The patterns suggested intelligence. Whoever had sent it wasn't just trying to be heard, they were waiting for an answer. Ordinary people around the world soon learned of it. Even though governments tried to keep it quiet at first, the truth was too big to contain. Leaks slipped into the media, and suddenly the world was buzzing. Radio's hosts speculated endlessly, TV programs brought in astronomers and philosophers, and social media overflowed with wild theories. Memes, jokes, fears, and dreams all collided. For every person shouting about alien invasion, another was whispering about friendship among the stars, and yet what stood out was not fear, but curiosity. Instead of trembling in terror, humanity leaned forward, eager to understand. Schools held debates, children drew pictures of starships, and old scientists, who had once been dismissed as dreamers, suddenly found themselves respected voices. Humanity, with all its flaws, refused to let fear be the first response. Still, in military rooms hidden deep underground, generals and commanders watched the data closely. They were realists. To them, the signal was not just a wonder, it was a possible threat. Plans were discussed in hushed voices. What if ships appeared in orbit? What if Earth was being studied not as a friend, but as prey? They prepared quietly, never letting the public see the sharp edge of their concern. The scientists worked day and night, decoding. They found within the signal a repeating pattern of prime numbers, a universal language. It was a way of saying, "We are intelligent and we want you to know it." But the message did not end there. It contained what looked like coordinates, points in space that traced a distant star system. And then, finally, it shifted. For the first time, the signal changed shape, bending into tones that almost sounded like a question. It was as if someone, far away, was knocking at the door of Earth and asking, "Are you there?" The decision to answer was not simple. Some leaders feared that any reply would reveal Earth's position more clearly. Others argued that it was too late. The aliens already knew where the signal had arrived. If they could send it, they already had Earth in their sights. Hiding was no longer an option. The question became, should humanity speak? The debates stretched for weeks. Committees argued, advisors warned, and experts weighed in. The world felt the weight of the unknown pressing down. And yet, during all those long nights of uncertainty, something remarkable happened. People across Earth felt a strange unity. The divisions that usually filled the news seemed to quiet. For once, it wasn't about one country or another. It wasn't about borders or politics. It was about humanity. Every person, every culture, standing together under the same stars, facing the same question. When the first reply was finally sent, it was not filled with fear or begging. It was simple, a signal of welcome, a greeting, encoded in numbers and symbols that said, "We hear you. We exist. We are here." Across the galaxy, those who had sent the original signal received it. They were not prepared for the tone of the answer. Most species, when first contacted, responded with silence or submission. But Earth, this small blue planet, had spoken with curiosity, with courage. The aliens who had cast their message into the void were not explorers in the human sense. They were scouts, searching for easy worlds to manipulate or control. Their first impression of Earth had been that it was fragile, a world of contradictions, a planet of war, disease, and chaos. They had expected fear. But now, as the human reply echoed back across the dark, they paused. Something was different here. On Earth, the reply brought waves of emotion. Crowds gathered in city squares, staring at screens showing the moment the message was sent. People cheered, cried, and held hands with strangers. In villages, towns, and great cities, humanity felt connected not only with one another but with the unknown out there. Children looked up at the stars with wonder, while elders whispered prayers or poems about the vastness of creation. The world had been changed forever. Even if no answer came, even if the signal was never heard again, the moment had already reshaped humanity's story. Earth had stepped into the galaxy, not as prey, not as cowards, but as voices unafraid to speak. But what the people of Earth did not know was that their reply had stirred unease in the ones listening. Far away, on ships hidden in the dark, eyes watched Earth with new calculation. The planet had revealed itself, yes, but not in weakness. Humanity had answered a call meant to test them, and they had done so with spirit. The unexpected signal, once seen as a discovery, had now become a warning. Something out there had knocked, and humanity had opened the door. What would step through it was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. Earth would never again be just a quiet blue world drifting in silence. It had spoken, and the galaxy was listening. And somewhere in that vast darkness, those who had sent the message began to whisper among themselves. They had thought Earth would be easy. But after that first reply, they started to wonder if calling this world had been a mistake. The signal had been sent, and the world was holding its breath. The reply from Earth had left the planet buzzing with excitement, but also with nervous silence. People wondered if the aliens would answer back. Days passed. Weeks passed. Some began to doubt anything would happen at all. Perhaps the original message had been nothing more than an experiment from some distant intelligence, a rock thrown into a pond just to see how the ripples moved. But then, one quiet evening, the signal returned. It wasn't the same as before. This time, the repeating rhythms and prime numbers were different. The message carried a new shape, a new layer. Scientists leaned closer to their screens as the data came in. The pulses had slowed, stretched, and shifted. And within them, there was meaning. After long hours of decoding, they found it. A greeting. Not a word in any human language, but something deeper, built on mathematics and shared symbols of the universe. It said, "We hear you. We see you. We are ready. The moment was electric. Humanity's first conversation with another species had begun. Governments scrambled to form committees, but the scientists were the ones who worked day and night, trying to break the patterns down further. They built translations, step by step, bridging the gap between two species who had never met, who could not share words but could share numbers, shapes, and ideas. The second reply from Earth was crafted with extreme care. It was not rushed, though the people of the world demanded it. Every symbol was chosen with thought, every sequence checked and checked again. Finally, the message was sent back into the void. We are here. We want peace. We want to learn. And then the real conversation began. The aliens' next response was slower, richer. They sent images encoded in signals, shapes drawn from the language of physics. At first, they were simple: circles, triangles, spirals. Then they grew more complex. A map of their star system appeared, a depiction of the planet they called home. Oceans, mountains, skies, familiar in concept but alien in detail. When those images were finally rendered on human screens, there was silence. For the first time in history, people were staring at the home of another intelligence, a world far beyond their reach, but suddenly, very close. The reply from Earth carried images, too, not of weapons or power, but of oceans and forests, of animals, of the human face. The first image chosen was of the Earth itself, a blue marble against the blackness of space. It was simple and beautiful. The next images showed rivers, mountains, and children laughing. It was humanity saying, "This is who we are. Not just machines of war, not just a fractured species. We are life, and we live on this small, fragile world." When the aliens replied again, the world waited in awe. Their next message carried not just pictures, but a kind of question. The patterns suggested curiosity. They wanted to know more about humanity's history, its people, its journey. They asked, in their own strange way, "What are you?" Answering that was not easy. How could Earth summarize itself in a handful of signals? The scientists debated endlessly. Should they share everything, the wars, the mistakes, the suffering? Or should they paint a brighter picture, showing only the good? After hours of argument, the reply took shape. It carried truth, but it carried hope as well. It showed humanity as a people who had struggled, who had fought through hunger, disease, and conflict, yet who had also built art, music, love, and science. The message said, "We are not perfect, but we endure, we dream, we rise again and again." The aliens answered more quickly this time. Their reply was short, almost sharp, as if they were startled. To them, survival in such conditions was not common. Many worlds they had seen fell into silence long before reaching such a point. But here was Earth, scarred, fractured, yet still alive, still proud. As days turned into weeks, the first conversation deepened. The aliens shared their knowledge of the stars, maps of galaxies, charts of energy flows, mathematics that reached beyond what humans had imagined. In return, Earth sent music, poetry, and philosophy, not because it was stronger than science, but because it was part of the soul of humanity, a piece of the heart that numbers alone could not capture. One evening, as another reply came in, something remarkable appeared. The aliens sent sound. Not just tones, not just pulses, but something like a voice. It was strange, high-pitched and layered, like wind blowing through metal pipes. It wasn't language as humans knew it, but it carried rhythm and emotion. They were trying to sing. In response, humanity sent music. Simple at first, flutes, drums, voices humming. Then symphonies, choirs, and the sounds of instruments from every corner of the world. Songs of sorrow, of triumph, of love. For the first time, the stars had become an echo chamber of culture, Two worlds exchanging not just knowledge but spirit. But beneath the beauty, there was unease. In quiet corners of the conversation, the aliens asked questions that cut deeper. They asked about Earth's armies, about its weapons, about the way humanity treated its own kind. Those questions made leaders nervous. Were the aliens curious? Or were they testing Earth? And yet the humans did not answer with fear. They admitted their flaws but added their progress. They spoke of treaties, of rebuilding, of people who gave their lives not for conquest but for peace. The message was clear. Yes, we fight. Yes, we struggle. But we also change. We also grow. The aliens paused for a long time after that, longer than usual. When they finally replied, their words, or rather their signals, carried an edge that was difficult to read. They said, "You are dangerous, and yet you are different." On Earth, those words caused a storm. Dangerous. The word sent shivers through governments and joy through ordinary people. To be seen as dangerous was to be respected. But different suggested something else, something the aliens themselves did not quite understand. It became clear to many scientists that the aliens had not reached out to Earth out of kindness. They had been searching for weakness, looking for another world to test or perhaps control. But the conversation had not gone as they expected. Instead of weakness, they found resilience. Instead of fear, they found courage. Instead of silence, they found a voice that refused to bow. And so the first conversation became something more than an exchange of data. It became a clash of perception. The aliens saw Earth as fragile, yet humanity showed itself as unbreakable. The aliens had sought easy prey, but what they discovered was spirit. In the villages, in the cities, in the quiet towns, people continued to follow every update. Radios broadcast the decoded messages. Schools played the alien sounds. Artists painted their visions of the distant world. The conversation was no longer just between governments and scientists. It belonged to everyone. Humanity was speaking as one, and the galaxy was listening. But in the dark halls of power, another realization grew. If the aliens had seen humanity as weak, they would have acted differently. If they had seen humanity as prey, Earth might already be under their shadow. The only thing that had stopped them, perhaps, was what humanity had revealed in those messages. Strength, spirit, a refusal to break. And though the people of Earth celebrated the wonder of their first true conversation, those watching closest began to understand. The aliens had not expected this. They had thought the call would end in fear. But Earth had answered with something else, something far more powerful. The first conversation was not just history, it was a warning. The galaxy now knew that Earth was not a world to be pitied or conquered. It was a world to be respected, perhaps even feared. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. The moment humanity had opened its voice to the stars, everything had changed. The first conversations had shaken the world. Humanity had finally spoken to a voice from the stars, and the stars had answered. But beneath the wonder and excitement, there was something else, something quiet, something hidden. The aliens had seen Earth. They had seen its oceans, forests, and skies. They had heard its music and its voices. They had listened to its stories. And yet what struck them most was not the beauty of Earth, but the strange force running through the people themselves. At first, they did not understand it. To them, humanity seemed fragile. A species with soft bodies, short lives, and a planet that could be easily broken. They expected fear. They expected silence. They expected weakness. But what they found was something different. The hidden strength of humanity was not in its weapons, not in its technology, not in its numbers. It was in its spirit. It was in the way people faced hardship and still stood tall. The aliens asked. Questions about human history and what they heard surprised them. They learned of times when the world had nearly been destroyed, when hunger and sickness swept through entire nations, when wars tore families apart. They learned of disasters, earthquakes, floods, and storms that had crushed cities. They expected to see a species that had given up long ago, but every time they looked deeper, they saw survival. One scientist from Earth tried to explain it in the simplest way. We fall, but we rise again. That is who we are. The aliens could not understand at first. In their history, many worlds had fallen and never risen. Whole civilizations had vanished after a single mistake, a single storm, a single war. But Earth was different. It carried its scars like armor. And this became clearer as the conversations went on. The aliens had asked about war, perhaps testing Earth, perhaps trying to measure its danger. Humans did not hide from the question. They admitted their history of conflict. But instead of shame, they told stories of resilience, of rebuilding cities from ashes, of turning enemies into allies, of finding peace after destruction. The aliens grew uneasy. To them, war meant weakness. To humans, war had often become the reason to grow stronger. Then came the stories of ordinary people, not kings, not generals, not scientists, but farmers who kept planting seeds after their fields were washed away, sailors who braved storms to bring food to starving towns, healers who stood in broken cities and cared for the sick when everyone else had fled. The aliens had no response to these tales. Their transmissions grew slower, almost cautious. They had expected to meet a species desperate for guidance, one that might cling to the knowledge of the stars like a drowning person clings to a rope. But instead, they found a people who already carried something unshakable inside them. It was not only survival, it was the strange way humans found meaning even in pain. They wrote songs about loss, painted pictures of sorrow, and still called it beautiful. They stood at graves and promised to live better for the ones who were gone. They had an endless ability to take suffering and turn it into strength. One message sent from Earth included a simple photograph. It showed a single flower pushing through a crack in broken concrete. The message underneath said, "This is us." When the aliens decoded it, they were silent for many days, but humanity did not stop sharing. They sent music from people who had lived through war but still sang of hope. They sent poems written by prisoners who had been denied freedom but not denied their voices. They sent stories of explorers who had crossed oceans not knowing if they would ever return. Each time the aliens answered slower. Each time their tone shifted from curiosity to caution. They had come to test humanity, but now they began to realize something troubling. Earth was not a weak world. It was a dangerous one. Not because of its weapons or armies, but because of the strength hidden in its people. In one of their strangest messages, the aliens sent a question that puzzled the translators. It could be read as, "Why do you keep going? Why do you not stop?" Humans answered with something simple. Because we must. Because life is worth it. It was not a grand speech, not a scientific formula. Just a truth that every child on Earth could understand. And yet, for the aliens, it was unsettling. They had lived in a universe where many worlds had fallen silent, where hope was fragile, where survival was rare. But humanity had chosen to fight for life again and again, no matter the cost. The hidden strength of humanity was not something you could measure on a chart. It was not something you could see in numbers. It was something you only understood when you saw a person stand up after being knocked down, when you heard laughter in the ruins of a broken city, when you saw hands reaching out to help even when there was nothing left to give. And now, the aliens had seen it. What they thought would be an easy conversation with a fragile world had turned into something else entirely. The humans had shown them music, poetry, courage, and survival. They had shown them scars and laughter living side by side. They had shown them a truth the aliens could not ignore. Humanity might look weak, but it was not weak at all. For the people of Earth, life went on almost as usual. They still worked in their fields, built their homes, cared for their children. But in the back of their minds, everyone knew something had changed. Someone out there was watching. Someone out there was learning who they really were. And slowly, the truth began to spread among the aliens, too. Rumors passed through their own ranks. This small blue planet, this fragile-looking world, carried something they had not seen before. It carried a spirit that refused to die. That spirit was dangerous, not because it sought to conquer, but because it could never be conquered. On Earth, no one could predict what would come next. Would the aliens grow closer, curious about this strange resilience? Or would they grow afraid, realizing they had stumbled upon something they could not control? One thing was clear. The hidden strength of humanity had been revealed, and it was not something that could be taken back. As the stars glittered above the quiet Earth, the conversation continued. But now, every word carried weight. Every signal was more than a greeting. It was a warning. Humanity had been tested, and humanity had answered. And somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between worlds, the aliens were beginning to regret ever calling Earth at all. The silence between Earth and the stars did not last long. After hearing the stories of survival and resilience, the aliens seemed unsettled. Their voices on the transmissions grew colder, sharper, as if they were trying to test the humans once more. It was almost as though the aliens could not believe what they had heard. They had listened to stories of people rising after every fall, of laughter in ruins, of strength born from pain. But instead of seeing it as beauty, they began to see it as danger. For a civilization that had conquered many worlds, strength that came from suffering was something they had never faced before. They had seen species with great armies, species with powerful weapons, species with advanced science. Those were predictable. But a species that grew stronger each time it was struck down, that was something they could not control. And so, the aliens chose to test humanity in a new way. One night, across the skies, strange lights appeared. At first, people thought it was a natural wonder, like the northern lights. But soon, scientists realized the truth. The lights were not natural. They were deliberate. The aliens were sending down energy, beams of strange radiation that disturbed the weather. Storms rose. In places that had never seen storms before, waves grew taller, winds grew wilder, and the air itself seemed restless. It was a warning. The aliens were not attacking directly, but they were showing their power. It was as if they were saying, "We control the skies. We control your world. Do not forget who holds the greater hand." On Earth, fear spread. People looked to their leaders, wondering what to do. Should they beg for peace? Should they stay silent? Should they fight back? The scientists tried to explain the situation calmly, but even their voices shook. "This is a test," one of them said. "They want to see if we will break." But humanity did not break. Instead, communities came together. In towns struck by sudden storms, neighbors worked side by side to repair what was broken. In villages hit by floods, strangers offered shelter to families they had never met before. In cities where the skies turned strange colors, people comforted their children with stories assuring them that they would be safe. The aliens were watching, expecting panic. But what they saw was unity. This frustrated them. The next wave of their test was harsher. Machines appeared in orbit, dark, metallic, shapes that blocked the sun in certain regions. The land beneath them grew cold, crops began to wither, and hunger threatened to spread. It was a cruel move, a test of endurance, but once again, humanity answered in its own way. Farmers shared their seeds. Countries sent food across borders. People found ways to grow crops in hidden places, under artificial lights, even in abandoned factories. Instead of collapsing, Earth adapted. It was not easy. There was suffering. There was fear. There were nights when people went hungry. But even in those nights, something strange happened. Music continued to play. Children still laughed in the streets. And families, even when they had little, found ways to share with others who had less. The aliens could not understand this. To them, suffering broke worlds. To them, hunger destroyed societies. To them, fear made people surrender. But on Earth, suffering did not only bring pain, it also brought solidarity. The test continued. The aliens sent machines into the ocean, stirring the waters, creating massive waves that struck at the coasts. Cities prepared for the worst. Yet once again, instead of collapse, there was resilience. People evacuated calmly, rescue teams worked tirelessly, and when the waves finally struck, the survivors rebuilt with determination. It became clear to the observers in the stars that humanity had a power they could not measure. The aliens had weapons that could destroy buildings in seconds. But Earth had something stronger. The will to rise again, no matter how many times it was knocked down. And that frightened them, because for all their power, the aliens did not know how to fight against something invisible. They could destroy homes, but they could not destroy hope. They could create hunger, but they could not kill the desire to share. They could bring storms, but they could not silence the laughter of children. Slowly, the test began to shift. The aliens' questions became different. No longer did they ask about weapons or armies. Now they asked about why humans helped one another even when it brought no reward. The answer came in simple words: because we need each other, because we are stronger together. And the aliens, for the first time, hesitated. They had lived in a universe where strength was measured in ships, in weapons, in control. But Earth had shown them a different kind of strength, one that came from unity, kindness, and endurance. It was not the answer they wanted. They had expected to see weakness, to confirm that Earth was fragile, that it could be broken with enough force. But instead, they had seen a species that grew more unbreakable with each trial. The final part of the test was almost desperate. One night, the skies lit up again, but this time with something new. Strange symbols, written in light across the stars. It was a question, the clearest one yet. What will you do if we try to conquer you? The people of Earth gathered their thoughts. Leaders debated, scientists considered, ordinary people whispered to one another. And then, the answer was sent. Not from a single person, but from many voices combined. The message said, "We will fight, but even if we fall, others will rise. We do not fear you, because we know who we are. You may take our cities, but you cannot take our spirit. You may test our strength, but you will never end it. That is why no one conquers Earth." When the message reached the aliens, silence followed. For the first time since the beginning of the strange contact, no answer came. The skies were quiet. The storms stopped. The machines in orbit withdrew, disappearing into the dark. And for humanity, that silence was victory. The people of Earth did not cheer loudly in the streets. They did not see themselves as conquerors. They simply continued their lives, tending their fields, building their homes, teaching their children. But deep down, they knew what had happened. They had been tested. Power had tried to break them. And instead of breaking, they had proven something greater. The test of power was not about weapons or control. It was about endurance, unity, and the spirit that refused to surrender. And in the vast silence of space, the aliens carried that lesson with them. They had seen Earth's hidden strength, and now they had seen its unshakable spirit in the face of power. What they once thought of as a defenseless planet was now marked in their memory as untouchable. Not because Earth had the biggest weapons, but because it had something no weapon could ever defeat. And so, humanity returned to its ordinary days. But from that day forward, the stars were no longer silent observers. They were witnesses, witnesses to a truth that echoed far beyond Earth. The test of power had been given, and humanity had passed. The stars were quiet for many days after the test ended. Humanity went back to life, though the memory of the storms, the dark skies, and the strange lights was still fresh in everyone's mind. People whispered about the aliens. Were they gone? For good? Or were they planning something even bigger? At first, the silence felt like peace. But then, one morning, the world scientists picked up another signal. It was strong, direct, and sharper than before. The aliens had returned. This time, their words carried no patience. Their message was filled with pride and anger. They said that Earth had been too bold, too proud, too unafraid. They declared that humanity had misunderstood their mercy. They claimed that now they would no longer test, but act. It was the day the aliens tried to prove themselves right. Without warning, their ships appeared in the skies, not hidden, not distant, but visible to everyone on the planet. Huge dark shapes floated above oceans and cities, casting shadows across entire regions. For the first time, humanity saw them not as lights or signals, but as a real physical force. Panic spread quickly. People ran into shelters, governments sent out emergency alerts, and every radio and television filled with the same breaking news. They are here. The aliens sent one more message. It was cold, threatening, and final. They demanded Earth surrender, accept their rule, and give up their independence. If not, they promised destruction. For a moment, fear returned. The people of Earth looked up at the skies and wondered if this was the end. After all, what chance did humans have against ships that could blot out the sun, against a force that could twist storms and block harvests? But deep down, something stronger than fear began to grow. It was not anger, not hatred. It was resolve. That day, people remembered everything they had already survived: the floods, the storms, the hunger, the tests of power. Each time they had stood together, each time they had endured. And so, instead of silence, the aliens received their answer. This time, the voices of humanity came louder than before. Not just from leaders or scientists, but from ordinary people, speaking through radios, through open transmissions, through any device that could carry a signal. The voices carried a single message: we will not bow. We will not break. If you choose to fight us, then you will regret it. Not because we are stronger than you, but because you do not understand us. We are not afraid of falling because we always rise again. The aliens did not understand. To them, words meant little compared to weapons. And so, they decided to act. Their ships unleashed beams of energy into the oceans, stirring massive waves. Explosions lit the sky. Thunder roared across continents. It was as if the end had truly come. But something unexpected happened. The destruction they unleashed did not break humanity's will. It united it even more. People rushed into the streets, helping strangers, rescuing the trapped, rebuilding even while the sky was still burning. In places where the aliens tried to strike hardest, the human spirit shone brightest. It was not about weapons. It was about people refusing to give in. Doctors worked without rest, engineers found ways to keep power alive, pilots flew through storms to bring supplies, and ordinary men and women stood in the rubble, refusing to surrender their hope. The aliens had expected screams of defeat. Instead, they saw determination in every corner of the world. And then came the moment that changed everything. One of the alien ships, hovering low over a great city, sent down a final strike, trying to terrify the population. But instead of scattering, In fear, the people gathered together in the streets. They looked up, thousands of them, unarmed and unafraid. And as the light of destruction gathered in the ship above, they raised their voices, not in screams, but in song. It was a song of defiance, a song of unity, a song that told the universe, "We are still here." The aliens hesitated. For all their power, they had never seen this before. A species staring at its own destruction and answering not with fear, but with courage. The strike never came. The ship held its fire. Other ships across the skies began to retreat, confused, unsettled, uncertain. The invaders who had conquered, worlds with terror, now faced something they could not conquer: human spirit. And in that moment, the truth became clear. It was not Earth that should regret this day. It was the aliens. Because on that day, they learned that their weapons could destroy buildings but not courage, that their machines could stir oceans but not break unity, that their power could darken skies but not extinguish hope. They realized, too late, that attacking humanity had been their greatest mistake. The ships withdrew into the distance, fading into the darkness of space, carrying with them the weight of their failure. The last message they sent was broken, hesitant, filled with a tone no one had ever expected: fear. The people of Earth listened to that final transmission. And then, for the first time since the contact began, they celebrated, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with relief and gratitude. The day that could have been Earth's end had become something else entirely. It was the day when humanity proved, not only to the stars but also to themselves, that they were unbreakable. From that moment on, the story spread across every corner of the world. Children were told about the day the skies filled with ships. Songs were written about the voices that rose in defiance. And history remembered it with a single phrase: the day the aliens regretted calling Earth. It was not remembered as a story of battle, but as a story of unity. Because the real victory was not in forcing the aliens away. The real victory was in showing that no matter how much power tried to crush them, humanity would always endure, always rebuild, always rise. And somewhere in the endless dark of space, the aliens carried that lesson forever. They had expected Earth to fall. Instead, they had seen a spirit they could never conquer. That was the day of regret. Not for humanity, but for those who thought Earth would be easy to defeat.